So, what happens when a designer raised in engineering, shaped by Apple and Airbnb, the likes of those companies, takes on the reins of one of the most innovative AI companies today? Well, you'll find out in today's episode. We are going to be having a conversation with Tuhin Kumar, who is the head of design at Luma AI, a company backed by $173 million in funding. And we're going to be talking to him about how design has become a critical part of their unfair advantage in the market. Welcome to the podcast, Tuhin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The most interesting thing for us about just talking with you so far has been that your path to design leadership has not been a conventional one. You've gone from blogging, freelancing, leading design. Talk to us about your journey, walk us through it, and the important moments that perhaps have shaped your perspective along the way.
For me, I think the story probably begins in engineering college. That's my background. I studied engineering, never formally went to design school, which ended up being an imposter syndrome for I think the first good amount of my career, where I would always feel, I'm sure they teach something in design school that I just don't know about. So I studied engineering, and then somewhere in my second or third year, for some reason, I wanted to get into blogging. My foray into blogging was because I got this new MacBook Pro, and I was like, I want to blog on this. So that was my first Apple device. And then everything was so beautiful. This was, I think, the Leopard era, if I remember correctly. And then that's how I got started, which is I wanted to do blogging. At that time, everything that existed did not look good to me. And so even at that time, I had some sense of what, to me, good looked like and what did not feel good. And so at that time, WordPress was the name of the game, and everything that existed did not feel particularly pleasant to my eyes. And so I was like, okay, I've been tinkering with software all my life. I have loved computers all my life, ever since I was a kid. And so playing with and tinkering with software has kind of been my thing until then. And so I was like, yeah, I know a little bit of Photoshop. I can do this. And so I end up doing what I think looks pretty. And I was like, okay, what next? And I was like, oh, actually, I got to learn HTML and CSS to make this real. Okay, let's learn that. It doesn't seem that hard. I'm studying engineering. How hard can it be? And then I teach myself that, and it's like, oh, well, actually, to make a WordPress theme, you also have to learn PHP on top of it. I was like, okay, let's learn that. And by the end of it, of course, the blog happened, but by the end of it, looking back, I was like, I enjoyed this whole process, and I want to know more about this and what this was. This was almost the same time during which iPhone had just come out. And that's kind of how I got exposed to this idea of there's this thing called design, specifically designing digital products. And that can be a profession. People can actually do that for a living. Growing up in India, that was not something I was exposed to. So that's what kicked off the journey for me. At that time, in hindsight, I feel like I should have thought a little bit more seriously about pursuing this as a career. I got a regular consultancy job out of college, and then I would come back home and keep doing design as a freelancer, stay awake till 4 a.m. and then go back, do the job. And after 8 months of doing this right after college, I was like, why am I doing this? Surely I can't imagine myself writing SQL queries for the next 40 years of my life. Let's make the switch. I had enough clients to kind of make the switch. I switched full time to a growing company there. And then from there, came to Silicon Valley to join a small startup called Pulse, a small news reading app that had just won the Apple Design Award. And that's kind of how I got here. From here, then went to Facebook about a year and a half after being at Pulse. That was, to me, a step change. That was, for the first time, I was part of a larger design team. Extreme imposter syndrome, because at that time, Facebook design team, this was roughly about 35 or 40 people on the Facebook design team back then. So fairly small compared to the size of the company right now. And at this time, everyone who I admired in design was there. Because when I was in India, basically through Twitter and everything, I would kind of get in touch with all the designers in the world, because that's how else will I find designers? And thankfully, Twitter was there at that time. I was pretty early on Twitter, and that's how I found all these people. And then when I came to Facebook, everyone was here. We had Mike Mattis, we had Tim Van Dam, all these Wilson Miner. I can keep going on. All these amazing people who had done amazing stuff and were all here in this moment. And so I got to learn a lot from them, both in terms of process, but also the capital D of design, like how do they see the world and how that influences design. And then Facebook being one of the first companies, I would say, in the Valley to really think of growth, it just changes how you think about product design a little bit. Like everything is looked at through a different lens. Like, what's the strategy? Why are we doing this? Is this a winning strategy? And then, okay, what are our success metrics? And from there, you kind of like, there's vision, but then there's also all of these kind of instrumentation in place. So that was like the second big thing from like, okay, there's this thing called design to, oh, here is another way of approaching design. And it can be both this like art thing, but also this like science thing, which is very measurable. Then that led to be like, okay, I know enough. I'm craving back to that small company. Did that with Clara and AI. That was, I think, my second brief intro to AI. My first one was at Facebook doing graph search and natural language processing. And so this would be like, you could just ask things like, which of my friends live in San Francisco? And just through natural language, which at that time in 2012, 2013 was pretty revolutionary. Cue Clara, all Clara did was basically you would CC this thing on an email and you can just, it would just schedule things for you. And that was my second, which now I'm like, someone should actually make that for all your email, and this would be the most amazing agentic thing ever. But yeah, a little too early. At that time, we were trying to figure out, because AI was not there, just recognizing calendar and date tokens were the big deal for us. And so we did that for about a year and a half. Towards the end, the company started pivoting towards recruiting because that's where a lot of the traction was. That was when I was like, okay, that's not particularly exciting to me personally. And so I went to Airbnb. Airbnb was what I would say after introduction to AI, the next big change, because this was the first time I saw another different way, which is in some way one could argue the almost polar opposite how Facebook operated at that time, wherein it was very much Brian and Brian's vision of what the world needs to be and what Airbnb needs to do in that world, what belonging means, like how do you think of this word belonging and carry that through the product. In the beginning, he would say things like, I want the Airbnb brand to be like Disney. And I would get it, but I would not get it because it's a travel company. What do you mean you want the brand to be like Disney and Nikes of the world? Of course, now I get it. But then it was like, okay, I think I get you, but really? But you can see like how just having that clarity of vision leads to like a very different kind of company and product. So that was like, I got really like hooked onto that way of thinking, did that for about 5 years, and then went to Apple, kind of had always dreamt, journey started with a MacBook Pro, felt fitting to go there, do my rounds. Did that for 3 years. It was amazing. I think like very similar to Airbnb in that it was very design driven. But in this case, the thing that was a little different than Airbnb was it was very much the taste and intention and craft of the individuals on the team versus someone like Brian at the top kind of being like, hey, this is how it should be. So it was very design oriented, but kind of flipped it on its head to be like, no, the studio and the people in the studio and who we hire there is why Apple is the way it is. And they bring every magic, every bit, almost every famous thing you can think of that iPhone has. Most of the times, at least the design part of it was very, very small group of people who really believed in that particular idea and kept just pushing it for sometimes over years. And that's how it ends up on the iPhone. So that was very kind of the last bit, I would say, that was radical and step change in my understanding of what is design and what are the different shapes of design at different kinds of companies and what that leads to in like how the companies themselves come to be and the products they end up creating through that. And then comes the final chapter right now, which is, okay, all of this, that was cool. And then came ChatGPT. My friend AI is back in my life. And suddenly it was like, oh, okay, this thing is clearly a flood, tsunami, all in one. I need to be at the forefront of this. And that was what led me and drew me to Luma, which is to try and understand what does this look like when it's visual? What does it look like when it's multimodal? And when we look at it through not just language, but through all these other faculties that we as humans have, what form does intelligence take and what new kinds of things can come to be in the world with that lens? So that's kind of the current arc. And those are what I would say, like the different lenses and the journey so far.
That's impressive. How has that adaptability shaped your growth as a designer and a leader, especially now that you see yourself working at the forefront of AI, which is really evolving quickly? Like what you saw yesterday, it's not the same thing you see today in the latest tool. So the change in different roles, how has it shaped your adaptability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think like it takes a little bit of intentionality to kind of even see that. Like of course, like if you go on Twitter or anywhere, you have everyone talking about AI changes this has changed forever, all of the hype stuff. But really, like in terms of design and how we build products, it is changing things in both subtle and big ways. I think for me, the biggest one was what craft means historically to what craft itself can become in this world of AI. I think that to me has been like a pretty significant one. I don't know if I still have all the answers, but I think in some ways the notion of craft hasn't changed, but where and how you apply that craft to has shifted a little bit, mostly because the surface area has grown. Historically speaking, we kind of had a fairly limited set of this is the technology, right? Like at least since 2007, once capacitive touch came into existence and mobile phones became very ubiquitous, we had a fairly limited set of, okay, these are your tools. Once you master these, you're kind of good and golden. I think what AI changes first and foremost is, yeah, there is no finite set of tools now. It's changing. And even that, you could say, oh, I know AI, I know how to prompt and all of this stuff. I know how to use visual AI. But even that, the capabilities of those tools themselves is really changing almost at a weekly basis, at least monthly for sure. And that leads to this place where we have to look at our work even more so as like a constantly evolving thing. But that means knowing where are you roughly headed is even more important. Not and by that I don't mean like be dogmatic about what you're doing. Like of course it's going to evolve. You'll get new inputs and it's going to change. But the general vector or the general direction of where you're going, and that is informed a little by like why are you doing this as a company, as a team? What real human problem are you trying to solve? And suddenly that is closer to what your real anchor can be. One can argue that should have always been the anchor, but it's even more clear that that kind of needs to be your anchor because the sway of new pieces of information being added and new technologies being added is coming so fast and rapidly that almost nothing else can be your anchor. The other one that has been really tricky, especially maybe more so for me personally, because it's coming right at the heels of being at Apple, where every decision is so meticulously done, is you have to leave a little bit of room in the product and the design for almost AI's intelligence to like carve these pathways for users. You will not likely know everything that a user is going to do. And this was, again, always true, but in traditional software, users could only do things for which you had a button or a menu item, right? Suddenly, there is no such boundary. They can literally ask anything, which most means you have to like make sure the error handling and boundary conditions are well designed and considered, but also means there will 100% be use cases that you did not think of. It's just human nature because how I would express an intent is different from how you would express the intent. And that's like very core at like this. So yeah, combined with like this idea of like things can keep evolving, this idea of things will keep evolving because new technology keeps becoming available. I think these two are probably the biggest ones for me. The other ones are a little more subtle. And I think like, they're like, okay, what is the social impact of all of this stuff and all of those things? I think the good news, contrary to like, it's very easy to be all negative about all of this, but contrary to the last cycle we had, which was social media, we are already talking about safety. Nobody was talking about social media in 2008. No one, which is like roughly 4 years from when Facebook started and MySpace had already been a thing by then and Twitter had just launched. We are 2022. Yeah, we are roughly like 3 years, 2 years, 3 years after ChatGPT's like public announcement. And we're already talking, there are like safety teams in all of these research labs. And so like from that lens, we are way too early in the kinds of conversation already with like, okay, guys, what is the impact of this thing? Governments are getting involved. And so like a lot of that is on the right footing, I would say. But yeah, coming back to the product side, the kind of how malleable something can be, both in its manifestation of the idea and how do you ground it to the long-term vision, and then how malleable can something be once it is given in the hands of the user. And that those are the two things that are oddly very different from traditional software. And you don't want to end up in a place where someone tweeted this. I think it was a friend Brian at Notion, but he tweeted something around the point of you don't want effectively to make the system prompt and everything so brittle that, in my words, I think that looks a little bit like you are limiting the AI's intelligence based on your own intelligence. Like you are creating this glass ceiling for this thing. And so you don't want to do that. So that's what I would say is like the things that are like very new compared to previous ways of doing things that will take and do take a little bit of time to really like nail down. Almost everything is tending towards general purpose software. Now we're also seeing these things tend towards it's not just the human running these things. Like there was a phase where it was human and the tool, but now you have 10%, 20% of these things could be run by agents in the background. Well, how do you oversee? Does that start looking closer and closer to like how people oversee factories? Like what does that actually start looking like? I don't know. But those are the bits at least that are changing.
Okay, with how quickly these things are changing, let's bring it because we're talking about craft right now, right? When you think about like divergent and convergent thinking in the way you iterate, how do you even manage that then? If there are so many use cases that you can't map out, you can't plan for, or you can't even begin to imagine how it ends up being used in the hand of the user, right? You can't predict that because many times you create software and how the users use it is like brand new and novel. So how do you manage iteration in your process and as well as your design team? How do you scale for that? And how do you then thinking about growth design as well? How do you balance speed with thoughtfulness in this kind of dynamic space?
Yeah, I think this is what I was trying to allude to a little bit on like what your North Star is or why you're going somewhere. Why are you going there? And hence, generally, where are you going? Needs to be very clear. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, of course, you will learn new things, but every new thing is also a distraction. And this is where, like, not knowing that, the number of new things are way too many. They're going to blind you if you're not very clear about this is where we are generally headed. The direction is clear, but yeah, we might take this route to get there, or we might just go straight for there. That is obviously going to change because the landscape itself is changing. Coming back to the point about how do you maintain intentionality? How do you even cover up these use cases? For us, it's a little bit like you design a lot more and you design kind of like much, I wouldn't say like much faster, but you try and like get the idea out much sooner. And this can depend. This can depend idea out to the internal teams. This can depend idea out to a core group of users who are closer to like friends of the company, and then an idea out to like, all your users, depending on what kind and what scale and stage of the company you are, or the importance of the feature itself. But getting that process happening faster versus sitting on something because you want to really like think about the right way of doing things. Yeah, I think it like shifts a little bit. I think there are people who are like maybe going all the way, which is, yeah, I just wipe coded this. Let me just throw it out there. To me, that has always rubbed the wrong way. I think it still rubs a little bit the wrong way, which is like, it just seems callous and careless. Like you have to care about the other side of the person who is using this. And yes, like there's definitely a group of like, early adopters who would love to get their hands on everything. And so if those are your users, yeah, go talk to them ASAP. But if your users are more mature companies, in our case, like studios, creative agencies, yeah, they're using this for their livelihood. It's not just a toy for them. And so like, you have to figure out, this is kind of what, is it for it? Get it out early to internal people so that we get first round of testing, then get the idea out to like the close friends and family of the company. And then kind of from there, okay, these are our trusted partners. Let's like seed this with these groups and see their early reactions, make fast iterations and get something out. On the design team side of things, we are able to try a lot more ideas much more quickly. This is the part where all the vibe coding, all the prototyping tools that we now have access to help us in that we're just able, instead of drawing all the time in Figma, a lot of these things we can kind of simulate the end-to-end thing, which is, oh, the person will just come. These are the rough constructs we have in the system. And this is roughly how the scaffolding is going to get laid out. Of course, it's not pretty, it's not pixel perfect or anything of that sort, but you get a very rough sense of like, okay, this is feeling to be in the right direction of things, or like, oh no, this is trying to be too brittle and like too almost like old school way of building products, because the moment we add one new capability, we'll have to struggle for like, guys, where do we put the next button now? And you will have 100 such capabilities in the land of AI. So again, the way and the texture of the UI starts shifting a little bit, but that's like how we do it, which is we test early. And on our side, we prototype a lot more because we can be much faster at this. So yeah, those are the two very concrete ways we're doing this.
Yeah, I'm hearing that shift coming up, right? There's that balance of, yes, you're still using Figma, the traditional way. I can't believe that's how we're referring to Figma now, the traditional way for design.
I mean, traditional ways are great. They're the classics for a reason. Like, I still use Photoshop once in a while. Like, there are still some things for which Photoshop is great. And that's just what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, no, I'm just referencing the speed with which things are shifting and changing, right? So you've got that Figma still, but more on a first iteration, get it out for testing basis, and then you've got leaning into AI to prototype and get the idea out and refine that. And I also recall reading that product design was one of the main reasons that a large investor chose to invest in Luma, right? And with that level of definition of craft, first of all, how do you define craft? What, is there some sort of standard expectation around it? So for example, I'm asking this for anyone who might be curious about the design team at Luma, right? What does that mean at Luma, as well as how much of a core role does it play in the product strategy?
Yeah, I think some of these things are a little easier and almost required when you're doing something 0 to 1. Because, you can think about this purely from like a designer mindset, but you can also think about it from like your end of the day using this is another tool you have of the many tools that exist to break through. And so if you have just the right amount of details that can get noticed, it's almost a different kind of vector of attack. And for me as a designer, that's like a very I would say shallow way of thinking about it. Like, I think it's what I would use when I have to justify why are we working on this piece of thing. For me, it's not a question. Like, I think the way I build teams, the kind of people I work with, and cross-functional partners that I love to work with, this is just not a question that is asked. It's the easiest way to kind of build amazing products is like, if you have a lot of people who are constantly asking you, but do we need to invest in that? Yeah, I mean, you can, of course, make up answers. Of course, we all know some chart, some flow, some way of expressing. Yeah, this thing is really important. But honestly, end of the day, it's very simple. You either see it or you don't. It's like that Steve thing of you either paint the backside of the cupboard or you don't. There's no other way of it. And so that's a little bit of how we think about it. When we're doing Luma, Dream Machine, 0 to 1, part of it was definitely I cared about it. The company, Amit, the CEO, we all cared about it. And then as the team grew, once you have something, it automatically attracts the same kind of people who are interested in doing it. It's oh, these guys are doing this. We want to be part of the team that is doing this. And it becomes a very virtuous cycle to attract exactly that kind. The exact opposite is also true. If you just ship something that is, not great, but you're shipping very fast, yeah, you will attract people who are very good at shipping very fast. But then when it comes to the point where okay, the craft of this thing has fallen, you will likely not have those people because you never attracted those kinds of people. So for us, it was very much about trying to understand who are we trying to build this for, and what are the little pieces where we can add not just delight, but honestly bring something new. So in some ways, all of the details and craft are a result of us trying to think about what is a problem that existed when we were designing this. So for example, even something as simple as the little concept pills we have that you click and you see a bunch of options. It started with this idea of prompting is hard. Especially if you're not like a creative director or art director, where you have all of this amazing vocabulary of all the genres of graphic design, art styles, lighting techniques. Hell, even creative directors don't have that kind of vocabulary. And then there is, well, your model might interpret those words differently based on its training data. So for us, that was solving this like problem of how do we let you, once you have said something, how do we let you kind of iterate within the periphery of that? And then its sister of like brainstorm is basically, well, you might have said something. How do we now let you go into much more creative zones from there? And those are like very two complementary features designed very much for people who are not too deep in AI, where, oh, I know that just the right prompt is not your kind of the thing that you're most proud of. You're here just to get some work done, probably for your client, probably for your personal expression or art. And we are helping you effectively traverse the latent space, but in a way that feels much more intuitive, where, oh yeah, you're just changing a few words and seeing the things change immediately. So for us, craft is still connected a little bit to like, what are we trying to build and who is it trying to solve for? One of the things that has stuck with me is, I think at some point, one of the Apple ads was about like, how does this make you feel? I think that was the way we approach a lot of design at Clara. That is honestly a little bit of like how we think of features even at Luma, which is, what is it making you feel? Because end of the day, if you're just playing on like, these are the features, everyone is going to have the same features. Let's be real. You might have like a 5-10% delta in exactly how good your model is for which use cases. But once you reach that, and there's a constant battle of then new capabilities and then new capabilities. But for the ones where everyone has kind of reached the plateau, yeah, it suddenly becomes a lot more about, but how does this make you feel? And that is even more important. I'm like honestly surprised that, especially with all the LLMs, personality and character design from games has not made more of its way in here. These things are all about vibes and personalities. And so it's really surprising to me that like it hasn't made its way in different forms. I'm sure, again, we will experiment and we will figure out. Like, for example, memory ended up being, a lot of people don't like it. And okay, that's maybe too skeuomorphic. Let's figure out what the right patterns here are. But yeah, that's a little bit of how I think of craft, which is it's still about how we want someone to feel when they use the product, but being very intentional about it and not just doing it for style, but doing it because it has a little bit more depth than that.
I mean, that's a lot to really unpack. And there was something you really mentioned, that in terms of bringing some of the principles from like character based from game design. And I think there's a product that I think really does that, which is, I think you introduced me to one of them recently, which you can usually, I think it's a dot. So yeah, that has like this character and personality in it, you know. So I think some of those already been also imbibed also. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, both Jason and Sam are amazing people. The people behind Dot, yeah, they're amazing and they think very deeply about this stuff.
Honestly, it shows, because I feel like I might have been one of the early adopters of Dot. I've been using it for a long time. And so by the time GPT got memory, I'm like, been there, done that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk more about growth loops right now. In what way is AI reshaping the traditional growth loop, and how are individuals, users, or amplifiers becoming more central to distribution than we used to have before?
This is another very good question. I don't think I will be able to do it full justice, but I'm going to try. I see this still as like two completely different spheres. I think there is a kind of AI which is much more about general use cases. The real kind of way to break through here is to figure out like the consumer use cases. That's one. I think like the companies that are like likely to do this a lot more are likely going to be your foundation model companies, because like it's right now, at least there's so much left to like tweak the models in just the right ways to get to like radically new use cases, that sitting at the application layer and trying to build like a large scale consumer thing is at this moment a little hard. It might be a whole different story in a year from now, who knows? But at this point, it feels a little too hard because you don't have kind of control of all the variables that you can influence. But that would be what a general consumer thing would look like. I mean, a great example of this is ChatGPT, like easy one, like to say, which is there's no single archetype of user that they're going for. There is many. And of course, now probably looking at the data, it's like, oh yeah, this bucket, oh yeah, the coders of the world, oh yeah, the deep research, and hence maybe it benefits financial analysts and all these people and startup CEOs. Okay, and then there's all these use cases, but then there's also map. And at some point it starts becoming, yeah, this is very much like a consumer leaning productivity kind of a thing, much more general purpose. On the other side, you have, but then a version of that is very specific is, say, Perplexity. Still consumer, but you can see how suddenly there is focus. It's not everything under the sun and come and ask and also create images and also maybe create videos. No, it's very specific. This is about curiosity and finding knowledge, and all of that done through this particular interaction mechanisms of answers through AI. It's not even quite chat, even now. It's very much answers through AI. So that's like already you can see, despite being a consumer play and not quite at the model foundation layer, it's a very specific kind of play. But then they get to do things like, okay, let's see if we try it in a browser, what comes out of that? And it's very much combining the model with like different form factors to see what comes out of it. When you're too close to the model, you do end up like, a lot of your attention is going on the model and like in some ways the most straight line application. When you get a little further from the model, which is the application layer, you lose some of the controls, direct control of the model because you're not the one training the model. But you do end up gaining some of the mental bandwidth to focus on, well, what form can it take? What else can we take? Can we aggregate using some other model and create something that feels multimodal? And so that's like another layer. And then you have like other modalities like that are not quite at the level that like language models are at. And those are like, say, images or video even, where we're just starting to see them being ready for production use cases. And that's where like doing the cost, the latency, and just the quality where it is just starting to get to. The kind of users is not general purpose enough. In some ways, like focusing on the people who are already needing these today, like who are the people who are already creating videos, and focusing on them ends up being a much more productive kind of growth strategy than trying to go for everyone, because the price is just not there. The latency is just not there. Now, is that a forever thing? No, of course not. Like the entire world lives on TikTok. So clearly it's not a forever thing. Clearly somehow video can never not be a consumer thing. It's just as of right now, the price and the latency don't quite justify it. So there you have to be very specific. And so for us, for Luma, when we started, we were a lot more like general purpose. We were focusing on prosumers. And you can see that kind of through even the landing page as of today, because it's still the one that we launched with. But over time, a lesson that we have learned is like, no, the people who are really benefiting from this are creative professionals. People who are already making videos, and how can we fit in their workflows? How can we find like how does AI make their workflows better? What are their pain points? And this becomes a little bit more about what I was talking earlier, which is you still have to know roughly where you're going and what problems are you trying to solve in the world, because how you will solve those problems will change. And in our case, like whether we were doing 3D or when we launched the model or when we launched Dream Machine, and now the kind of what are we trying to solve, which is we're trying to give people ways of creative expression and solving these like creative tooling and creative workflow problem using whatever AI technology we need to solve those problems. And so that suddenly is like a very strong anchor of like, you can see the wave of technology, the capabilities, what's possible, where you run into walls. All of these things will constantly happen when you're at the bleeding edge of technology. But having that clear anchor of like, this is who and whose problem we are trying to solve, it makes everything, every conversation, every decision so much easier. And so in our case, it's very much like, okay, who are the creative professionals? Different kinds across films, ads, UGC content, everything and anywhere, marketing, everything and anywhere where video content and visual content is being produced. How can we help those people? what are their pain points? How much of it is about just creating variety and number of options? How much of it is about ideation? How many movies never see the light of the day because all that was left was a script and you couldn't quite see enough because the cost of making the previs is already way too much. And so like, will it help a lot new creators to kind of tell their stories? And that's like a little bit of like how we look at growth, which is being very specific compared to someone who is building a full-on consumer general purpose thing. In our case, right now, it's very specific because that's where the market and the technology meet and give the most rewards.
Okay. I have a follow-up question to that. So
Yeah.
yes, I understand on a high level how it works. Thank you for explaining. But I'm now wondering, so when it comes to like experimentation from a growth lens, how does that happen as well? Or is it all baked in together into product design anyway that you're already ticking those boxes off from the get-go?
Yes and no. I think like one of the things that is beautiful about creative workflows is like oddly it doesn't change as much as you would think based on if you're making a film or if you're making an ad or if you're making a short like 10-minute thing, right? Like end of the day, there is generally some story and some world that you have in your head, and from there you kind of go in. I think the things that it is unlocking for us is like, yeah, you could now come with your own videos and do things with them. So for us, like the growth and like how we think about growth is in some ways twofold. One is like making sure the core thing that we build is built for one or two very specific kind of users in mind. So it's not everybody, because what is that? Like, who is everybody? And so it's very much like, okay, it's for this kind of person and this kind of person. And running those through, like when we're designing them, running those through in reviews, in crits, like, okay, I do this and I do this. What if I had this thing? What if my editor comes in and says this thing? Okay, here is how that workflow would look like. Okay, so that's one. The other thing that is useful for us a little bit is like, because we are so focused on who we are trying to go after, it's not like a larger group that we kind of have to discover. This group exists. This group exists in studios. It exists in creative agencies. Our job, oddly, is a little simpler in that, yeah, we just go and talk to them. We just go and talk to them and see how they work and understand what they're doing. We also talk a lot with our users to try and understand what we're doing in terms of even how we are approaching these. You know, there's even in creative professionals, there's so many we can go after. We can go after movies, we can go after ads, we can go after fashion, architecture. And the way we kind of settled on these is like basically through a lot of talking to everyone, trying to understand what would be the magical unlocks for them, what would make it useful for them today, not like when the quality gets better and when the price is here and when the late, it's like, no. Today, what are your biggest pain points, and listening to them and then understanding actually this, and this we can solve today. These two, relatively simple for us to research this and hopefully find a solution that is really good. Yeah, that makes it very easy to be like, yeah, let's focus on this use case, this user group, and like really go after them. And once your motion is not just like, you know, completely product-led growth, SaaS, and waiting so much on like virality and K factors, it's a little bit more about like, no, good talk to people. Because once you land the right studios, the right agencies, you just need enough of those for it to start becoming, because then the great thing about creatives is like they talk. Every creative product that you've ever used is like, yeah, someone started using it, and like someone would see it from over their shoulder and be like, yo, what was that? What were you using? What did you just use? Or how did you do this so fast? Or, oh my God, this look is so good. What did you use? What filter did you use? What effect did you use? And that's how it happens. So for us, the biggest thing is, are we solving the pain points of the very specific customer, almost our highest expectation customers? And if we can do that, that's almost as good as any great viral or growth loop for us, which is, no, we know exactly who the person is and exactly what will solve their problem. And because we have talked to enough of them, we also are not blinded too much by like, we solve this like one narrow problem and kind of miss the forest for the trees. Because no, you have to talk to all of them, because this is the part about AI that you always have to keep an eye out, which is, end of the day, this is a general purpose technology. This is not a specific technology like upscaling. Upscaling is one of the facets of it. The technology is truly general purpose multimodal intelligence. Now, of course, if I were to go around shopping and selling multimodal intelligence today, not a lot of buyers because you gotta get people one by one from where they are, meet them where they are, and the meeting them where they are today is very much creative folks. So that kind of makes the growth stuff a little bit easier. But we got to it by honestly just talking and clearly breaking down the market segments and then talking them more specifically to understand which of these can we realistically in this quarter get to, in the next half get to, and honestly being just intellectually honest about it, because sometimes you can do all this motion and might still not be intellectually honest about it, because really you want to do this thing and you will somehow twist the whole story to get to do just this thing versus no, you actually just needed to do this thing. That was the first step for growth right now. Yeah.
I believe what I'm hearing is also just like AI by itself is also turning everything. It's in everything that we know. It's just really turning it in a blender and spitting a different process out there. So, because it's like conversations, understanding the very peculiar needs, and that becomes word of mouth referrals, and it just becomes its own engine. Can you share a moment where there was just an organic interaction or something with the product that genuinely surprised you and was just a delightful moment for you as a builder?
Oh my God, yes. This was the original launch of Dream Machine. Dream Machine, the model preview, not even the product. So a little bit of backstory. We're getting the model ready. The product was still in design and early building phase. And at some point we were like, guys, we might actually have to do a model preview versus waiting for the product and the model to go out together. Because this stuff moves so fast. You also there is a real thing as being first to market. At least for now, there is. And that for us was okay, we should do that. That led to but we don't want to do another just research preview. This was on the heels of Sora preview in Feb, I think. And I think everyone in the company felt that no one wanted yet another demo. They wanted to try their hands. And so that led to, okay, let's build a page. Let's have people try stuff. Well, then this thing costs money, so we can't just have them try forever. Okay, let's put a limit. That led to, well, from the last time we did text to 3D, we know people will then want to pay a little bit. That led to, okay, maybe they can pay this one pack and get X more. That led to, what if we just created pricing plans? And that is how the first launch happened. And honestly, we thought, okay, yeah, it's a great model. We were very happy and proud of the model, but the response we saw, insane, insane response. This was, I think for the first 4 or 5 days, our growth was faster than ChatGPT's growth when it launched, insane. I cannot tell you how insane. Wow. But obviously, this is where there is growth, and then there is meaningful growth comes in. But all of these users are free users. They come, they use your service, and then they go. And so then from there, we had to become very diligent about, okay, who are these people? Understanding what are they trying to create? From there, understanding who is eventually upgrading to different payment plans, and talking to the paid users, what use cases are we serving for them? Talking to some of the free ones to understand what are they using it for? Trying to see are they even returning, and realizing no, they're not. They probably someone posted on Reddit, that leads to a spike. Someone posted somewhere else, that leads to a spike. Spikes in millions, but yeah, they're not coming back. We tried all the simple tricks of let's send them emails when new features are launching. That will get them to come. We tried all the basic tech tricks in the book, and ultimately it led to good old okay, let's look at our cohort retention. And that's I mean, if you guys know this, but for those who don't, that is your hard truth of it's looking into a clear lake. That is what tells you what is the reality. And until and unless your retention curve is not flattening, because basically you'll start off, and then of course fewer people will come the next day, and of course fewer people will come the day. So of course this retention curve is going to look like this, and it's very scary. But at some point, it's got to flatten, because if it doesn't flatten, let's be real, you don't have product market fit. No, you're not even close to it. So for us, then once we saw that, then it was very much who are these people? Let's talk to them, talk to them, talk to them. That led to the cohorts I talked about, the segments. The segments led to talk to more of those who are not our users, what are their pain points. And that led to, okay. But yeah, it did start off with this like surprising, delightful, honestly amazing moment of, oh my God. So what is going on to our servers constantly breaking, not being able to keep up? We didn't know so many people were going to come and use this thing. And so like, yeah, that was amazing. But it's also a good lesson of like, not every hype and not every growth is good growth. Because end of the day, if that's not converting, especially for a paid product, if that's not converting to paid users and you don't have billions to keep running the like hype marketing train forever, yeah, it's not helpful. It's like kind of pouring water into a leaky bucket. Well, the water is eventually going to leak out. Like you're not going to be left with anything. Yeah. So yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. Not every growth is a good growth. Yeah. So here is really changing in terms of the tools and everything, right? For example, Figma sort of released the new tools, like all the new stuff that they have right in the market. So as Luma AI, how do you guys maintain your design velocity while staying grounded to what your user really needs as a tool?
That is hard. I think like that is, I think all of us are still learning it. I don't think we have like really nailed it. It's a little easier when you have like paying customers and you're like constantly talking to them, because hopefully you have generally a good internal compass within the company of like, this is what our users are really trying to do. Of course, once in a while, someone either will launch something or some new tech will come that, end of the day, we're all like children and we love shiny new toys. And so, of course, that happens. That happens everywhere. Like it happens in the biggest companies that you can think of and the smallest companies. So for us, like, it's just kind of being a little more mindful of like, and reminding when it needs reminding of like, yes, that is great, but this is the user that we are going for. Are we still aligned on that user? If so, then based on all our conversations, these are the problems. And of course, like sometimes it also happens where a new thing comes in and it changes fundamentally. You might have had this like glorious plan of like, we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this. And then a new thing comes and you're like, actually, all of those things have been flattened into this one thing here. And yeah, that also happens. And you have to be both willing to look at these things, but also not be constantly distracted and frazzled when these things come out. Like, so yeah, I don't know if we have nailed it. I think like we try. It's a little easier when you are like very clear about your customer and kind of this is why I keep pointing out like your goal and your why. It gets a little easy. But yeah, I think I've said this in many places, this is the most chaotic I have seen tech. It feels like, at least if you're in AI, this very much feels like a wartime versus peacetime. And everyone is constantly in this like race. Race to what is a little unclear because nobody can quite define AGI, but we are all racing. And so in that, it is extremely mindful to be like, okay, but what is our lane? And we shouldn't start racing in someone else's lane and end up like very far from where we want it to be. Because if you're just reacting to new tools. So yeah, I think like the answer is a little bit of both. You are aware, but you also keep grounded by like your customer. But then if something changes what you previously thought your roadmap should be, because instead of 3 things, it's now 1 thing, yeah, you should adapt and incorporate that.
Incredible. Okay, let's look ahead, right? As much as, yes, we can't predict the future, let's try. How do you then see just like the future of design in general? There are so many tools that are launching every single day. There's a new one, Paper, which might be the Figma killer.
The good thing about having so many X killers is that all it proves, honestly, for now, is that X is still the king. Like, honestly, because nobody's trying to make a killer for something that is not even like successful. So if I were Figma, I don't know, just put my head down and focus on the users, and that's all that's needed.
That's what matters. The whole argument for it being the killer of, when you then look at all the new products, the way Figma has expanded, you're like, is it? It's not really. It's not apples to apples, really. But yeah, the point is, there's so many shifts that are happening that a lot of design teams are not prepared for. So, what would your advice be for designers who might be working in AI or not even working in AI? What kind of mindsets and skills should we be thinking about to really future-proof ourselves moving forward?
Yeah, I think one, like, these will sound vague, but I will urge people to like think about them in the context of their life and their roles, and like really think about it, not because it's a tidbit you heard on a podcast. One is curiosity, like genuinely being curious about the tools that are coming up. There's a lot of hype, and it sometimes might feel like snake oil, but underneath all of that, there is real progress happening and real shift happening in what computers can do, what our tools can do, and hence what people can do with those tools. So be the kind of person who is able to take apart all the hype and look at the core of something and be curious about it. By curious, I mean don't just look at it as it passes by your feed. Go try that thing. Spend either the weekend or whatever is your time to like expand your abilities. Try it. Try it for a passion project that you might have been thinking about. Because unless you play with it, it is, and that leads to my second point, which is it is a new material, it is a new medium. It's a little bit like if you were first given touch and it was just resistive touch, everybody basically just like tapped. And we had these styluses, then you would like press really hard on that. And then you got capacitive touch. And in the beginning, it's just that tapping became very nice. It was so easy to tap. It took a while to know, oh yeah, you can just like swipe. And all these gestures, like they take a while. This is exactly what new mediums feel like. And this is very much a new medium and a new infrastructure. So take time to get your hands dirty. Don't just be intellectually curious, be genuinely curious, get your hands dirty and play with these things. These are, I would say, like the two biggest ones. I think like lastly, like we all have grown up with different notions of to be a good designer, you should do this, then you should do this, then you should get to this level, then maybe you should switch to management, then you should do this. Whether for design or for other fields, all of those rule books are a little out of sync going forward. So this is where lean into your curiosity and be honest with what do you want? Like if you were to go on this course that you're on right now, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not where you want to be. Where do you actually see yourself in 5 years? Or you could do the reverse. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And then genuinely answer based on everything you're doing today. Do you actually see yourself going there? And that will help us understand like, okay, what are the things we can improve? What are the things we can change? But the other part is all these old notions of this is what I think I should be in 5 years from now are a little out of whack. Go figure what you want to do, what makes you happy, because this is the last thing, which I think these words, we butcher them on tech so much that like the word agency has lost all its meaning and agency. But I do mean it in like the meaning the word had a year ago. Maybe try to remember that meaning. And agency and being intentional, you have everything at your fingertips. It is the most magical time. You literally have a machine that can be whatever you want it to be. It can be your therapist, it can be your knowledge partner, it can be your coding buddy, it can be your design agency, it can be all of these things. But then it's still being all of these things to you. So you have to still guide it to be like, okay, I want this. And the I want this is best articulated when you have that sense of agency. That sense of agency comes with knowing where do you want to go. That knowing where do you want to go and it being somewhat correct for you and correct for the time in which you live happens when you have genuine curiosity about the tools, processes, and society. All of those together is what I would say is the way to like think about the future.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to wrap up gradually. We've just got 2 questions for you and we'll finish this off. And this is more of a get to know you type of question. So the first one is, what is one thing that you're learning or exploring right now outside of work or outside of design even?
have phases. In my past phases, I have done violin, piano. Fashion is one of those perennial phases of me for me, but I just don't have enough time to go really deep on it. And so most of my fashion exposure and things outside of design is limited to watching YouTube channels, like watching like people break down runway shows and like understanding everything about like different techniques. And then the most recent one is finally reconnecting with something I had been doing in like 2017, 2018, which is meditation. And so just like kind of connecting back to it and going deeper and deeper into it. Yeah. Like, and then the last one is reading books, like just reading lots of books. I love reading books. And there was a phase in the last 3, 4 years where I just didn't have enough time, or rather, I didn't make enough time to do it because I would kind of just let life take its course. But now I am like finding that time again, and it's amazing how much I love reading. So yeah, reading and meditation as of right now.
Yeah. Does the easel in your background have anything to do
That's
with?
not me. That's my wife's. Everyone asks this. I should tell her to remove this. It's kind of embarrassing to constantly answer this, but no, that's my wife's. I was telling her yesterday, it's like, you haven't painted in a while. People have now started asking, it's still white. And she's like, you can tell them it's subtly different shades of white and just tell them they can't see it yet. I was like, oh my God.
I was rapidly bringing out because, like, yeah, this is where I'm asking. So I
Oh
paint.
my God, amazing. Yeah.
I was hoping to bond with you, like, oh my god, kindred spirits.
I have a whole like set of watercolors. I used to do watercolors, but now I spend so much of my time sketching. I think maybe this is just like a phase where I kind of want to find things that have nothing to do with sketching stuff. Like I think for me, like fashion sketching is the closest to sketching because anything else and it starts getting too close to work, and I start thinking about work stuff.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Then, okay, so for our final one, what's the best piece of advice that a mentor or just, well, I don't know if you've had a mentor before, but just someone that you really respect or find their words valuable in guiding your journey? What's a piece of advice that's been given to you that has resonated for so long and continues to resonate?
I feel like this is one of those questions where everyone has like 10 of these, but when someone asks you, you can just never quite conjure them on the fly. As of this moment, one that is kind of coming at the top of my mind is this person was my manager, mentor, friend, and it's not even an advice, it's a question they asked that kind of took me like a little bit by surprise, which a lot of people ask, but I think there was something about the way he asked it that felt so pointed and genuine and intentional. His question was very simple. It was like, so what drives you? And I am embarrassed to say it took me like 5 minutes to kind of answer what drives me, which obviously what drove me at that time of my career is very different from what drives me now. But still, that question has stuck with me. Like, what really drives you? And then, like, since then, I've like read multiple versions of this in like philosophy and stuff, which is like, we are what we think, or a man is what he loves the most. Like all of these variations of the same thing. But really, what drives you? If you're like very honest with yourself, it's one of those questions that you almost might have a different answer to yourself and to someone else, because sometimes that answer might be as simple as money. And for some reason, you've just grown up in an environment where saying that out loud is something to be ashamed about. Or that answer might be influence or legacy, whatever. And you come up with these like, no, what drives me is like craft. I'm like, yeah, sure. Like there are like five people in the world who are really, really driven by craft. Let's be honest. Because again, there's nothing bad about it. It's just like how we've been programmed through different like eras and societies we live in. Like, oh yeah, this is not the right thing to say here. This is not the right thing. Yeah, go in a room of VCs and definitely being motivated by money will be very nice thing to say. So it's really funny. But like that question though, yeah, it stuck with me. I don't know why. And at least when you ask this right now, it was the first thing. Sorry to all my past mentors. I can't remember anything else right now. But hopefully this is a good one.
I don't know, it is. I started to chuckle once you asked it because I'm like, right. And then you say it took you 5 minutes. I'm like, Right. I
Yeah.
probably can relate to that. But yeah, no. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast today. We have loved chatting with you. And yeah, to all of our listeners out there, it has been an incredible conversation. I hope that this is something that you can find a lot of takeaways from. And as always, I'm Inyelua and my co-host.
Money or money. I
All
don't know.
right. Bye for now.